I'm standing in the middle of Narita International Airport at 11 p.m., watching my wife of 8 years walk through the priority security lane without looking back once. The boarding pass in my hand feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds, because I know what's coming. In exactly 7 minutes, I'm going to walk up to that gate, scan this piece of paper, and hear 3 words that will change my entire life. Ticket has been canceled, but I don't know that yet. Right now, I'm still holding on to the hope that Sarah wouldn't actually do this. That the woman I married, the woman who promised to love me through better or worse, wouldn't leave me stranded in a foreign country with nothing but the clothes on my back and $43 in my wallet. Before we dive in, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to take you on a journey you won't forget. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let me know if you've ever been go through this situation. Trust me, by the end of this you'll understand why that question matters. My name is Jack Morrison, and 72 hours ago I thought I understood my marriage. I thought I knew my wife. I thought I had my life figured out. I was wrong about all of it. Let me take you back to where this nightmare actually started. 4 days ago, I was sitting in our penthouse apartment in Manhattan, the one Sarah's father bought us as a wedding gift, watching my wife pack designer luggage for our anniversary trip to Japan. 8 years together, 6 years married, and she wanted to celebrate in Tokyo. First-class tickets on Japan Airlines, reservations at the Park Hyatt, private tours of temples that don't allow regular tourists. The trip was going to cost more than I made in 6 months, but Sarah insisted. She always insisted. That's what happens when you marry into the kind of wealth that makes your own middle-class upbringing look like poverty. You stop arguing about money because you never had enough to argue about it in the first place. Sarah Lancaster Morrison. Even her hyphenated last name announced her status. Daughter of Richard Lancaster, the hedge fund titan whose face appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine with the headline, "The Man Who Never Loses." Sarah inherited his confidence, his precision, his absolute certainty that the world would bend to accommodate him. When we met 9 years ago at a charity gala in the Hamptons, I was there as a favor to my college roommate who needed an extra server for the event. She was there in a dress that cost more than my car, holding a champagne flute like it was an extension of her perfectly manicured hand. I should have known then that we existed in different universes. But she smiled at me when I refilled her glass, actually looked at me like I was a human being instead of invisible help, and asked my name. 3 months later, we were dating. A year after that, I proposed with a ring I'd saved 9 months to buy. Her mother cried when she saw it, and not tears of joy. Sarah wore it anyway. Told her family she loved it because I'd chosen it. That should have been my first clue about the dynamic that would define our marriage. Sarah loved me, but she loved me the way someone loves a rescue dog, with affection and pity and an underlying assumption that I should be grateful for the life she'd given me. The flight to Tokyo was brutal in ways that had nothing to do with the 14 hours in the air. We sat in first class, pods that converted into full beds with sheets that probably had a higher thread count than anything I'd owned before marrying Sarah. She worked through most of the flight, laptop balanced on her knees, conference calls with London and Singapore that couldn't wait despite the fact that we were supposed to be celebrating our anniversary. I watched movies I'd already seen and tried not to feel like an expensive accessory she'd brought along for appearances. When we landed at Narita, exhausted and jet-lagged, Sarah was immediately on her phone coordinating with her assistant back in New York. The car service she'd arranged was waiting, a pristine black Mercedes with a driver who spoke perfect English and knew exactly which luxury hotel we were headed to without being told. Tokyo at night was overwhelming in the best way. Neon lights that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Crowds of people moving with purpose through streets that never seemed to sleep. The smell of street food mixing with expensive perfume and car exhaust. I wanted to explore, to wander, to get lost in the organized chaos of it all. Sarah wanted to get to the hotel, shower, and join a video conference about a merger that was happening in Frankfurt, the Park Hyatt. Tokyo occupies the top 14 floors of a skyscraper in Shinjuku. Our room was on the 47th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city. It was stunning and impersonal and felt exactly like every other luxury hotel room Sarah had taken me to over the years. Same marble bathroom, same crisp white linens, Same fruit basket with exotic selections that cost more than a week's worth of groceries. I stood at the window looking out at Tokyo while Sarah talked stock prices and acquisition strategies with people I'd never meet. This was our anniversary celebration. This was us. The next 2 days followed the same pattern. Sarah had scheduled every moment of our trip with the same precision she applied to her work. Private tour of the Sensoji temple at sunrise before the tourists arrived. Arranged through connections her father had with the Japanese business community. Sushi breakfast at Tsukiji market with a guide who explained the auction process while Sarah checked her phone. Every 30 seconds, a traditional tea ceremony in a private garden where I was the only one actually paying attention to the ritual while Sarah typed emails on her phone hidden beneath the table. I tried to enjoy it. I really did. This was Japan, a place I'd dreamed of visiting since I was a kid, reading manga and watching anime in my cramped bedroom in Ohio, but every experience was filtered through Sarah's world of exclusive access and VIP treatment. We never just stumbled upon anything. We never got lost and found something unexpected. Everything was curated, scheduled, controlled. On the third night, we had dinner at a Michelin 3-star restaurant in Roppongi. The kind of place where they don't list prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. We sat at a private counter, watching the chef prepare each course with the kind of focused artistry that takes decades to perfect. It should have been romantic. It should have been memorable. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Sarah's phone buzzed for the 100th time that evening. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and stood up abruptly. "I need to take this," she said without looking at me. "It's the Singapore deal." The chef paused mid-motion, his knife hovering over an immaculate piece of toro. Sarah didn't notice. She was already walking toward the restaurant's entrance, phone pressed to her ear, her voice dropping into that authoritative tone she used when talking to subordinates. I sat there alone, watching the chef complete his work, watching him plate the dish, with the same care he'd shown when both of us were paying attention. When he slid the plate across the counter toward Sarah's empty seat, he gave me a look that somehow conveyed both sympathy and judgment. 15 minutes passed, then 20. The course grew cold. The chef moved on to preparing the next dish. I ate my portion in silence, each bite perfect and completely joyless. When Sarah finally returned, she didn't apologize. She looked at her untouched plate, sighed with annoyance, and signaled the server to clear it away. "That was $200 worth of food," she said, as if the waste was somehow the restaurant's fault for serving it before her call ended. "Can we talk about something?" I asked quietly, very aware of the other diners around us, very aware that we were in a place where scenes were not made and emotions were not displayed. Sarah looked at me with an expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. Patient exhaustion. The look of someone dealing with a child who doesn't understand adult matters. "Not now, Jack. I'm handling a crisis." "This entire trip has been you handling a crisis," I said, keeping my voice level. "We're supposed to be celebrating our anniversary, and you've spent every moment working." "Because I have responsibilities," Sarah replied sharply. "Some of us can't just shut off our professional lives because we're on vacation." And there it was. The implication that my work as a freelance graphic designer wasn't real work, that my clients weren't real clients, that my career was somehow a hobby I indulged in while living off her family's money. The rest of the dinner was silent. We went through 7 more courses of incredible food that tasted like ash in my mouth. Sarah checked her phone between every bite. The chef stopped making eye contact with either of us. Back at the hotel, I tried to salvage something from the trip. We had 1 more full day in Tokyo before our flight home. Maybe we could actually spend it together. Do something spontaneous. Be a married couple instead of a CEO and her uncomfortable accessory. Sarah had other plans. She was in the bathroom getting ready for bed when she called out that she'd scheduled a morning meeting with potential investors from Osaka. They were flying in specifically to meet with her. It was too important an opportunity to pass up. Our last day in Tokyo, our anniversary trip, and she'd scheduled a business meeting. I felt something crack inside me, something that had been holding firm for years despite constant pressure. "You canceled our plans for a meeting?" I asked, standing in the doorway of the bathroom watching her remove makeup that probably cost more per ounce than gold. "I didn't cancel anything," she said calmly, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "We didn't have plans." "You didn't have plans," I corrected. "I was hoping we could actually spend the day together, like a married couple." "We are spending time together, Jack. We're on this trip together." Being in the same country doesn't count as spending time together. Sarah, I might as well have stayed in New York for all the attention you've paid me. She turned around then and I saw anger flash across her face. The real anger she usually kept buried under layers of professional composure. You want to talk about attention? Fine, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I've built a career managing hundreds of millions of dollars while you play around with logo designs for local businesses. Let's talk about how my family has supported both of us financially while you chase your creative dreams. Let's talk about how ungrateful you're being right now. Each sentence landed like a punch. I'd known she looked down on my work. I'd known her family saw me as a gold digger who'd married up. But hearing it said out loud in that cold, dismissive tone was different. Those creative dreams you're mocking paid my rent before I met you, I said quietly. That career you're so proud of was built on your father's connections and your family's money. At least what I've built is actually mine. Sarah's face went pale, then red. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. You've spent 8 years making me feel small. Sarah, making me feel like I should be grateful you chose me. Like I should apologize for not being born into wealth. Well, I'm done apologizing for who I am. You want to be done? Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more frightening than shouting. Fine, let's be done. She pushed past me out of the bathroom, grabbed her phone and started making calls. It was 2 a.m. Tokyo time, which meant it was early afternoon in New York. Her assistant answered on the first ring. Sarah spoke in clipped professional sentences, requesting changes to travel arrangements, her eyes never leaving mine. When she hung up, she smiled. The coldest smile I'd ever seen. There, she said. I've moved my flight to tomorrow afternoon. I'm going home early. You can have Tokyo all to yourself. Enjoy your spontaneous day. Sarah, come on. Don't do this. Do what? Give you exactly what you asked for? You wanted time alone. You've got it. That's not what I meant, and you know it. What I know, Jack, is that I'm tired of pretending this marriage is something it's not. I'm tired of carrying someone who resents me for being successful. I'm tired of feeling guilty for having money. She started packing her things with efficient, angry movements. We'll talk when we're both back in New York, after we've had time to think about what we really want. I stood there watching her pack, watching 8 years of marriage get folded into a Louis Vuitton suitcase. And I didn't try to stop her. My pride wouldn't let me. The next morning, I woke up to find Sarah already gone. She'd taken an early car to the airport without saying goodbye. There was a note on the hotel stationery. Your flight is this evening at 7 p.m. I've left the booking confirmation on the desk. We'll discuss everything when you're home. That was it. No apology. No affection. Just logistics. I spent the day wandering Tokyo alone, trying to process what had happened. Part of me was relieved. The tension had been building for years, and at least now it was out in the open. Part of me was terrified. Sarah controlled everything in our life. The apartment, the bank accounts, the social circle. If she decided to end this marriage, I'd be left with nothing but my laptop and whatever freelance clients hadn't come through her family's connections. By the time I got to Narita Airport that evening, I'd convinced myself that we'd work it out. Every marriage had rough patches. We'd get home, have a real conversation, maybe see a counselor. We'd fix this. I checked my bags at the counter without incident. The agent was polite and efficient, printing my boarding pass and directing me to security. I went through the motions automatically, my mind still replaying the fight, still trying to figure out where exactly everything had gone wrong. The airport was crowded with evening departures, families traveling together, business people heading home, couples holding hands and laughing about shared jokes. Normal people living normal lives where their spouses didn't abandon them in foreign countries. I found my gate and sat down to wait for boarding. That's when I decided to check my email and saw 3 messages from Japan Airlines. The first was a confirmation of my original booking. The second was a notification that my reservation had been modified. The third was a cancellation notice. Timestamp showed it had been sent 4 hours ago, right around the time Sarah would have been boarding her own flight. My hands started shaking. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake. Some computer glitch. There was no way Sarah would actually cancel my flight home. No way she'd leave me stranded here with no warning. I walked up to the gate counter, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The gate agent looked up with a professional smile that faded when she saw my face.
Can I help you, sir?
I held out my boarding pass with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. There's been some kind of mistake with my reservation. Can you check my booking? She took the pass, scanned it, and frowned at her computer screen. The frown deepened. She typed something else. Then she looked up at me with an expression that mixed pity and discomfort. I'm very sorry, sir, but this reservation has been canceled. No, I said stupidly, as if I could argue with reality. No, that's not possible. Check again. According to our system, the ticket was canceled this afternoon by the primary account holder. You're not authorized to travel on this booking. The words weren't making sense. They were in English. I understood each individual word. But strung together like this, they might as well have been a foreign language. My wife canceled it, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The agent's expression softened even more, which somehow made everything worse. I'm not able to discuss the specific details, sir. But yes, the cancellation was made by the account holder who made the original booking. Put me on another flight, I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. I'll pay for it. I need to get home. She typed something else, shook her head gently. I'm very sorry, but all our flights to New York are completely booked for the next 4 days. There's a holiday weekend and travel is extremely heavy right now. What about other airlines? Same situation, I'm afraid. And sir, even if we did have availability, a last-minute international ticket would be approximately $9,000. $9,000. The number hung in the air between us. I had $43 in my wallet. My credit cards were maxed from trying to keep up with Sarah's lifestyle, charging dinners and clothes and experiences I couldn't afford because I was too proud to let her pay for everything. My checking account had maybe $200 in it. Everything else was in joint accounts that Sarah controlled. Sir, you'll need to step aside, the agent said gently. We're about to begin boarding and I have other passengers to assist. I moved away from the counter in a daze. Around me, people were lining up to board. People with valid tickets and working credit cards and spouses who didn't abandon them in foreign airports. I found an empty bench near the windows and sat down. Heavily, my phone showed full bars, but when I tried to call Sarah, the call wouldn't connect. International roaming had been canceled. Of course it had. She'd thought of everything. I tried to access our joint bank account through the app. Password had been changed. I pulled up my email to see if there was any message from her, any explanation, any acknowledgement of what she'd done. Nothing. The boarding announcement for my canceled flight echoed through the terminal in Japanese and then English. Passengers traveling to New York. JFK should proceed to gate 73 for immediate boarding. I watched through the windows as the plane I should have been on pushed back from the gate. Sarah had been on an earlier flight, probably landing in New York right now, probably already spinning the story to her family about how I'd ruined our anniversary trip with my jealousy and insecurity. I sat on that bench for 2 hours, watching flights board and depart, watching the terminal slowly empty as the evening wore on. I needed to think, needed to figure out what to do. The American embassy wouldn't help. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't a victim of a crime. I was just a guy whose rich wife had stranded him. They might help eventually, but eventually could mean days or weeks. I could call my brother Marcus. He'd want to help. But Marcus was a middle school teacher with a wife and twin daughters. He didn't have $9,000 to wire me for a plane ticket. My parents were retired on a fixed income in Florida. Asking them would mean explaining that my marriage was falling apart, and that would break their hearts. They loved Sarah, thought she was the best thing that ever happened to me. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely powerless. No money, no phone service, no way home. No one coming to save me. That's when I noticed the man watching me. He was standing near the currency exchange about 30 feet away, looking at his phone, but I could feel his attention on me. Mid-50s, expensive suit. The kind of quiet confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. When he caught me looking back, he walked over with the casual authority of someone used to inserting himself into other people's business. American, he asked. His accent was British, upper-class London. Yeah, I replied warily. You look like someone having the worst day of their life, he said, not unkindly. Want to talk about it? I don't even know you. Exactly, he said, sitting down next to me without invitation. Which means I have no reason to judge you and you have no reason to lie to me. Most honest conversation you'll have all year. Something about his directness, or maybe just my complete desperation made me tell him everything. About Sarah, about the canceled ticket, about being stuck here with no money and no way home. He listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. I'm going to make you an offer. And before you say anything, Just listen to the whole thing. His name was James Chen, and he'd made his fortune in tech startups in Silicon Valley before moving to London. He was in Tokyo for business meetings and his flight back to London left in 3 hours. "Here's my situation," he said. "I'm in the middle of a very delicate negotiation with a Japanese manufacturing company. The CEO is traditional, old school, very concerned with image and respect." He pulled up a photo on his phone showing an elegant Japanese woman, mid-40s, wearing traditional business attire. "This is Yuki Tanaka. She's the translator who's been working with me on this deal. Very professional, very good at her job. Yesterday, she made the mistake of politely declining a dinner invitation from the CEO's son. Now he's threatening to tank the entire deal unless his father fires her. It's face-saving nonsense, but it's going to cost me a $50 million contract. I don't understand what this has to do with me," I said. "Yuki is meeting me here at the airport in 20 minutes, James continued. "The CEO's son is also coming, apparently to make sure she's actually fired and sent away in shame. But if Yuki isn't alone, if she's with someone, specifically with a husband who came to escort her home, then there's no shame involved. She's simply a married woman who appropriately declined an inappropriate advance. You want me to pretend to be her husband?" "For exactly 30 minutes, James said. "Just stand next to her, look like you belong together. Let the CEO's son see that she's not available and not vulnerable. That's all. In exchange, I'll book you on my flight to London tonight, business class. From there, I'll get you a first-class ticket to New York tomorrow, plus $5,000 in cash for your trouble and a recommendation to several companies I know that need graphic designers." This was insane. This was obviously some kind of scam or setup. But I looked at James Chen and saw something that surprised me. Genuine desperation hidden behind expensive clothes and practiced calm. "Why would you trust a stranger?" I asked. "Because strangers can't betray expectations they never had," James replied. "And because 6 months ago, my own business partner screwed me over in a deal. Someone I'd known for 20 years, someone I trusted completely, cost me $8 million in a friendship I thought would last forever." He smiled without humor. "Strangers are more reliable." Before I could answer, a woman approached us. She was the woman from the photo, Yuki Tanaka, pulling a small suitcase behind her. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "James-san," she said with a small bow. "Everything is arranged." James stood up smoothly. "Yuki, this is Jack. He's going to help us with our problem. Jack, this is Yuki Tanaka, the best translator in Tokyo and someone who deserves better than being harassed by entitled rich kids." Yuki looked at me with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You understand what James is asking? To pretend to be your husband when this guy shows up," I said. "To make it look like you're not alone and unprotected." She studied me for another moment, then nodded. "Thank you. This is very kind." We didn't have to wait long. A young man in designer clothes and an expression of barely contained arrogance appeared near our gate. He was flanked by 2 other men who had the look of high-priced assistants, the kind whose job is to make their boss feel important. "That's Kenji Tanaka," Yuki murmured. "No relation despite the same last name. He's going to enjoy this." Kenji spotted us and walked over with the swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences in his life. His eyes locked onto Yuki first with an expression that made my skin crawl. Combination of desire and anger and wounded pride. Then he noticed me standing next to her, my hand resting lightly on the small of her back the way James had quickly coached me. Kenji's expression shifted to confusion, then anger. "Yuki-san," he said in English for my benefit. "I thought you would be alone." "I'm traveling with my husband," Yuki replied calmly in English. "He came to escort me home." "Your husband?" Kenji's voice dripped with skepticism. "This is the first I'm hearing about a husband." "That's because my personal life is not your concern," Yuki said with polite firmness. "I declined your dinner invitation because I'm married, not because I have any issue with you or your family. I respect you and your father very much." Kenji looked at me with open hostility. "And what do you do, husband?" "I'm a designer," I said, keeping my voice level. "I work remotely, which allows me to travel with Yuki for her assignments." "Very convenient," Kenji sneered. "A husband who appears exactly when needed." "We've been married for 3 years, Yuki said. "We keep our relationship private for professional reasons. But since you've made such pointed inquiries about my personal life, I felt it was important to be clear." She slipped her hand into mine, the gesture natural and practiced. "My husband understands that my work requires me to maintain professional boundaries with clients. He trusts me completely. Unlike some men, he doesn't mistake politeness for interest." The insult landed. Kenji's face flushed red. One of his assistants whispered something urgent in Japanese. Kenji responded sharply, also in Japanese. Yuki's expression never changed, but I felt her hand tighten slightly in mine. James stepped forward smoothly, his Japanese polished and formal. Whatever he said made Kenji pause. James continued speaking, his tone respectful but firm. Finally, Kenji responded with a curt nod, turned on his heel, and walked away with his assistants trailing behind. "What did you say?" I asked James. I reminded him that insulting a colleague's spouse is disrespectful. "To his father's business," James replied. And I mentioned that I've already discussed this situation with his father, who was not pleased to hear his son was creating problems over a rejected dinner invitation. Yuki let out a long breath. "Thank you both. That could have been very ugly." James checked his watch. "Our flight board's in 90 minutes. Jack, ready to go to London?" I should have hesitated. Should have asked more questions. Should have been more suspicious. But standing there in that airport, having just pretended to be a stranger's husband to save her from harassment, I realized I had nothing to lose. Sarah had already taken everything that mattered. "Yeah," I said, "let's go." The next 6 hours were surreal. James had booked us all in business class on British Airways. Yuki sat across the aisle, falling asleep almost immediately, with the exhaustion of someone who'd been under intense stress. James worked on his laptop while I sat in a seat that cost more than my monthly rent, eating food prepared by actual chefs, drinking wine that probably had a vintage year I couldn't pronounce. Somewhere over Mongolia, James closed his laptop and turned to me. "Your wife," he said without preamble. "She's not just angry. She's trying to break you." "How do you know?" "Because that's what people like her do," James said. "People who've never had to struggle, who've never faced real consequences. They don't understand that other people have limits. They push and push until something breaks. Then they're genuinely surprised when there's actual damage." He pulled out his phone and opened a contact. "This is my lawyer in New York, Helen Brenner. She specializes in high-asset divorces, specifically cases where one spouse has all the financial power. She'll take your case." "James, I can't afford a lawyer like that." "You're not listening," James said patiently. "She'll take your case because I'm asking her to. As a favor to me, you'll meet with her when you get back to New York. You'll tell her everything that happened, every detail, every cruel comment, every controlling behavior, everything. But I don't have evidence." "You have your testimony," James said. "You have the record of your canceled ticket. You have the gate agent who witnessed it. You have me and Yuki as witnesses to your state when we found you. Helen will know what to do with that." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You don't even know me." James was quiet for a moment. 5 years ago, my marriage ended," he finally said. "I was working constantly, building companies, making money, thinking that success was the same as happiness. My wife tried to tell me we were losing each other. I didn't listen." He looked out the window at the darkness. "When she finally left, I was angry, felt betrayed, couldn't understand why she didn't appreciate everything I'd given her. Took me 2 years and a lot of therapy to realize I'd been giving her everything except what she actually needed: time, attention, partnership." He turned back to me. "Your situation is different. Your wife isn't leaving you because you didn't pay attention. She's leaving you because you dared to want attention in the first place. That kind of cruelty deserves consequences." We landed at Heathrow at 6 in the morning London time. James had a car waiting and driver who took us to a private terminal where James made phone calls while Yuki and I drank coffee and tried to wake up. 2 hours later, I was on a British Airways flight to JFK, first class, with $5,000 in cash in my new carry-on bag that James had bought at the airport. Yuki had hugged me goodbye at the terminal, thanking me again for helping her. She'd given me her card and told me to contact her if I ever needed translation services, or if I just needed a friend who understood what it felt like to be powerless. James walked me to the gate himself. His handshake was firm and his eyes were serious. "Don't go back to that apartment," he said. "Don't go back to her. The moment you walk through that door, you're telling her this behavior is acceptable. Stay with your brother. Stay in a hotel. Stay anywhere but with Sarah." "She's still my wife," I protested weakly. "She left you in a foreign country with no money, no phone, and no way home," James said flatly. "That's not a wife. That's a sociopath with a marriage license. His lawyer, Helen, will call you tomorrow. Answer the phone. Tell her everything. Let her protect you because Sarah sure as hell isn't going to." The flight back to New York was a blur. I slept hard, the kind of exhausted sleep that comes after your body finally accepts that the crisis is over. When I woke up, we were descending into JFK. It was late afternoon. I'd been gone from home for 5 days, but it felt like a lifetime. Going through customs, I kept expecting to see Sarah waiting in arrivals. Part of me hoped she would be there, that she'd realized how badly she'd screwed up, that she'd want to apologize and fix things. She wasn't there, but my brother Marcus was. I'd texted him from London explaining the basics. Now he was leaning against a pillar near baggage claim, his teacher clothes rumpled from a long day, his face showing a mix of concern and barely contained anger. When he saw me, he pushed off the pillar and pulled me into a hug that lasted long, enough to be embarrassing. "Sarah called Mom," he said when he finally let go. "Told her you'd abandoned her in Tokyo after some fight. Told her you'd probably show up eventually, but she didn't know when or where. Mom's been worried sick. I abandoned her," I said, hearing the bitterness in my own voice. "That's the story she's telling." Marcus looked at me carefully. "What's the real story, Jack?" I told him everything. Standing there in the JFK arrivals hall with travelers streaming past us, I told him about the fight, about waking up to find Sarah gone, about the canceled ticket and being stranded at Narita with nothing. I told him about James and Yuki, about the fake marriage and the real kindness of strangers. When I finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called our mother. "Mom, he's fine. He's with me. No, don't listen to what Sarah told you. Let me put Jack on." I talked to my mother for 20 minutes, explaining what really happened, listening to her voice shift from relief to anger to fierce protective love. She wanted me to come to Florida, wanted to take care of me the way mothers do. I promised I'd visit soon, but right now, I needed to stay in New York and deal with the divorce, because that's what this was. This was definitely a divorce. Marcus took me back to his apartment in Queens, a modest 2-bedroom where he lived with his wife, Jennifer, and their twin 8-year-old daughters. Jennifer took one look at me and pulled me into the same kind of fierce hug Marcus had given me at the airport. The girls, Emma and Sophie, looked at me with the curious concern of children who know something bad happened, but don't understand what. "Uncle Jack," Emma asked, "why do you look so sad?" "Just tired, sweetie," I managed to say. "Long trip." "You can stay in our room," Sophie announced. "We'll sleep in sleeping bags." "That would be very nice," I told her seriously. "Thank you." That night I slept in a twin bed, covered in princess sheets, in a room decorated with crayon drawings and participation trophies. It was the complete opposite of the penthouse apartment I shared with Sarah, and it was the first place I'd felt actually safe in years. The next morning, Helen Brenner called at exactly 9 a.m. Her voice was crisp and professional. "James Chen spoke very highly of you," she said without preamble. "He's asked me to handle your divorce. I'd like to meet today if possible." We met at her office in Midtown, a sleek space filled with expensive furniture and walls of legal books. Helen was in her 50s, gray hair cut sharply, a woman who looked like she'd spent her career making powerful men uncomfortable. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "Your wife made several critical mistakes," she said. "First, she left a clear paper trail with the canceled ticket. Second, she stranded you in a foreign country, which demonstrates extreme cruelty. Third, she clearly controls all the marital assets, which gives us grounds to argue financial abuse." "But I signed a prenup," I said. "Sarah's family insisted on it." "Let me see it." I pulled up the PDF on my phone. The document I'd signed 8 years ago at Sarah's family lawyer's office. Helen read through it carefully, her expression showing nothing. "This is actually helpful," she finally said. "What? How?" "Because it was written under the assumption that you were a gold digger trying to access the Lancaster family fortune," Helen explained. "It protects their assets, but it doesn't actually address marital assets or anything you built together. More importantly, it was written before you were married. A lot has changed in 8 years. She leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to file for divorce immediately, citing abandonment and cruelty. We're going to request temporary spousal support. We're going to document every way Sarah has controlled and diminished you during this marriage. And we're going to make sure that when this is over, you walk away with enough resources to rebuild your life independently." "I can't afford your fees," I said quietly. "James is covering my retainer," Helen replied. "After that, we'll work out a payment plan." She smiled slightly. "I'm not doing this for the money, Jack. I'm doing this because I'm very good at making rich people face consequences. And your wife needs to face some consequences." The divorce took 7 months. 7 months of legal filings, and court dates and depositions where Sarah's lawyers tried to paint me as an ungrateful leech who'd married Sarah for her money. Helen dismantled every argument with cold precision. She presented the canceled ticket as evidence of abandonment. She brought in the gate agent from Narita who remembered me, remembered the cancellation, remembered Sarah's name on the account. She subpoenaed phone records showing Sarah had canceled my international plan while I was stranded. She documented every joint account Sarah had locked me out of, every credit card she'd controlled, every financial decision she'd made without consulting me. Sarah's legal team tried to argue that I'd been verbally abusive, that I'd made scenes in public, that I'd been jealous of her success. Helen brought in James Chen, who flew from London to testify about finding me abandoned at the airport. She brought in Yuki Tanaka, who testified via video about my character and willingness to help a stranger. She even tracked down the chef from that Michelin restaurant in Tokyo who remembered Sarah taking a business call during our anniversary dinner and never apologizing. The turning point came during Sarah's deposition. Helen asked her directly why she'd canceled my ticket. Sarah's answer, delivered with the same cold confidence she'd always had, sealed her fate. He was being unreasonable and ungrateful. I needed space to think, and I thought a few days alone in Tokyo might help him gain perspective on how good he had it. You thought leaving your husband stranded in a foreign country with no money, no phone service, and no way home would help him gain perspective. Helen repeated slowly. Yes, Sarah said, not seeing the trap. Sometimes people need to face consequences for their behavior. The court didn't see it that way. Neither did public opinion once the story leaked to the press. Suddenly I wasn't just Jack Morrison, failed husband of a Lancaster heiress. I was the man who'd been abandoned at a Tokyo airport by his wealthy wife. The story went viral. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of being made to feel small by partners, of economic abuse disguised as generosity, of relationships where money became a weapon. Sarah's family tried to control the narrative, releasing statements about privacy and dignity and the sanctity of marriage. But the damage was done. The Lancaster name, which had always been associated with success and power, was now also associated with cruelty. The settlement wasn't huge by Lancaster standards, but it was life-changing for me. I got $250,000, enough to pay off my debts, buy a modest apartment, and rebuild my design business, without depending on anyone's connections or charity. More importantly, I got my self-respect back. Sarah, according to mutual acquaintances, married a private equity manager 11 months after our divorce was finalized. Someone who understood that marriages in their world were strategic partnerships, not love stories. Someone who would never embarrass her by wanting actual attention or affection. I heard through Marcus that she'd seen the wedding photos I posted when I married Yuki 2 years after my divorce was final. Yes, that Yuki, the translator from Tokyo. We'd stayed in touch after that night at the airport. Started with professional emails about potential design work for her clients. Evolved into long conversations about our experiences, about feeling powerless, about rebuilding ourselves. She visited New York for a conference 8 months after my divorce. I showed her the city. We talked for hours over coffee that turned into dinner that turned into breakfast the next morning. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than a fairy tale. It was two people who understood what it meant to be vulnerable, who'd both been in positions where someone else held all the power, who'd both been saved by the unexpected kindness of strangers. Our wedding was small, Marcus and Jennifer and the twins, my mother crying happy tears, James Chen flying in from London with a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than the entire ceremony, a handful of Yuki's family from Tokyo, no drama, no power plays, no one trying to prove anything. Just two people who chose each other with clear eyes and open hearts. We honeymooned in Kyoto, staying in a small traditional inn that cost a fraction of what Sarah would have spent. We got lost in temple gardens and ate at tiny restaurants where no one spoke English and we had to point at pictures to order. It was perfect. Sarah sent a gift, apparently, a crystal vase from Tiffany that probably cost thousands of dollars. We donated it to a charity auction, used the money to fund a program that helps people escape financially abusive relationships. I rebuilt my design business from the ground up, focusing on clients who valued my work, not my connections. It's smaller than it was during my marriage to Sarah, but it's completely mine. Every client is someone I earned through my portfolio, not through family connections. Every project is something I can be proud of, Yuki continues her translation work. And we figured out how to build a life where we're partners, not saviors and victims, where we both contribute financially and emotionally, where neither of us has to feel small to make the other feel big. 6 months ago, I ran into Sarah at a gallery opening in Chelsea. She was there with her new husband, a man in an expensive suit who checked his phone every 30 seconds. She saw me across the room and our eyes met. I could see her trying to decide whether to ignore me or acknowledge me. In the end, she walked over, her husband trailing behind like an accessory. "Jack," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello. You look well." "So do you," I replied honestly. She did look well. Expensively dressed, perfectly put together, completely empty behind the eyes. "This is my husband, Richard," she said, gesturing at the man beside her. "Richard, this is Jack Morrison, my ex-husband." Richard shook my hand with the limp grip of someone going through motions. "I've heard a lot about you," he said in a tone that suggested he'd heard nothing good. "All lies, I'm sure," I said lightly. Sarah's expression flickered. Something that might have been regret or might have been annoyance. "I heard you remarried," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Yuki's around here somewhere, probably explaining modern art to someone in 3 different languages." "The translator," Sarah said. "From Tokyo?" "Yes." There was an awkward pause. Richard checked his phone again. Sarah watched him with an expression I recognized. The same patient exhaustion she used to give me when I wanted her attention. "I should go find Yuki," I said. "It was good seeing you, Sarah. Take care of yourself." "Jack," she said as I started to walk away. I turned back. "I didn't mean for things to end the way they did." "I know," I said. "But they did end that way. And honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to me." I walked away before she could respond, weaving through the gallery crowd until I found Yuki standing in front of an abstract painting. Her head tilted in concentration. She looked up when I appeared beside her, smiled that genuine smile that still caught me off guard with its warmth. "There you are," she said, slipping her hand into mine. "I was beginning to think you'd gotten lost." "Just ran into some old history," I told her. "Nothing important." She squeezed my hand, understanding without needing details. "Ready to go home?" "More than ready." We walked out of the gallery into the cool New York evening. 2 people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and built something real from that chaos. Behind us, Sarah was still in that gallery with her new husband who didn't look at her, living in a world where money could buy everything except the things that actually mattered. I don't think about her often anymore. Don't wonder what she's doing or whether she regrets what she did. But sometimes, when I'm working late in my home office and Yuki brings me tea without being asked, or when we're cooking dinner together and laughing about nothing important, or when I wake up next to someone who actually wants me there, I think about that night in Narita Airport, about standing there with nothing but $43 and the belief that my life was over, about how wrong I was. My life wasn't over that night. It was finally beginning. The real life I was supposed to have, not the performance I'd been putting on for 8 years. Standing in that airport, abandoned and alone, I thought I'd lost everything. But you can't lose what you never really had. Sarah's love had always been conditional, always came with strings attached, always required me to be less so she could be more. What I found instead, first with James and Yuki's unexpected kindness, and later with Yuki's genuine partnership, was something Sarah's money could never buy. The knowledge that I was enough exactly as I was, that my worth wasn't determined by my bank account or my connections or my willingness to make myself small, that I deserved to be with someone who saw me as an equal, not a charity case or an embarrassing liability. The lesson I learned, the one that cost me a marriage and a comfortable life in 8 years of trying to be someone I wasn't, is this: sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is exactly what needs to happen. Sometimes being abandoned is actually being set free. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're actually made of. And sometimes the kindness of strangers who owe you nothing means more than the cruelty of people who promised you everything. If you're reading this and you're in a relationship where you feel small, where your worth is constantly questioned, where love feels like a transaction you can never quite afford, know that there's life on the other side of that. Better life, fuller life, life where you don't have to apologize for wanting to be seen and valued and loved for who you actually are. It won't be easy. Walking away never is. But staying in a place that diminishes you, that makes you doubt your own value, that requires you to constantly prove you deserve basic kindness and respect, That's harder. That's a different kind of death. Slow and quiet and complete. Sarah did me a favor that day in Tokyo, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. She showed me exactly who she was when the mask slipped. She revealed the truth that I'd been avoiding for years, that our marriage was built on inequality and control, not partnership and love. And in doing so, she freed me to find something real. So if you're standing in your own version of that airport right now, stranded and scared and convinced your life is over, hold on. Help is coming. Maybe from a stranger, maybe from yourself, but it's coming. And on the other side of this nightmare is a version of your life you can't even imagine yet. One where you're not just surviving someone else's story. One where you're finally, actually genuinely alive in your own. That's worth losing everything for. That's worth being abandoned at an airport for. That's worth every moment of fear and uncertainty and doubt. Because the life you build from nothing, the life you create on your own terms with people who actually value you, that life is worth more than all the money and comfort and security in the world. I know, I've lived both versions. And I choose being stranded at Narita Airport with $43 over another day in that penthouse prison anytime, every single time. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've made it this far, if any of this resonated with you, I hope you'll remember that your worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves. It's determined by how you rebuild yourself when everything falls apart. And sometimes, the best thing that ever happens to you starts with the worst moment of your life.